The surprising lesson of the Exodus. Shabbat HaGadol 5781. There was no king more righteous than Yoshiahu in Yisrael or Yehuda, in Israel or Judah. Sefer Malachim, the book of Kings, tells us there was no king like him who turned to the Lord with all his heart, with all his soul, and all his might. He undertook a massive reform effort to root out idolatry from the land. And yet, when he attempted to protect the sovereignty of the Holy Land by preventing the Egyptians from using the Promised Land as a land bridge to cross into Mesopotamia to engage in warfare, he was swatted dead by the Egyptians like a fly at the Megiddo Pass. Question is, why wasn't Yoshiahu protected by God if he was such a pious individual, such a pious ruler? After all, we're told that he actually reinstituted the observance of Pesach. Malachim tells us that Pesach had not been celebrated since the time of the Shoftim, the judges, hundreds of years before. Now, there may be a bit of hyperbole here. It doesn't necessarily mean that people weren't celebrating Pesach. It may mean it wasn't celebrated on a large scale or such grandeur as Yoshiahu celebrated it with. But nevertheless, he turned back to God. He led the nation in turning back to God as they celebrated this festival of freedom from Egypt. And he decided, just as his ancestors had been freed, he and his nation should also be freed from Egypt. They shouldn't be a vassal to Egypt. Now, we're expecting to hear about a second victory, almost a second exodus in a sense, where again, the Israelites are able to throw off the yoke of the Egyptians. But instead, as we said, he's killed, swatted like a fly dead at the Megiddo Pass by the Egyptians. Makara, what happened? What's going on here? Michael Goodman, who's a biblical scholar, points out that you would expect that Yoshiahu would have been protected because of his piety. He expected to be protected and succeed in battle because of his piety. But the message of the Exodus is not that God will protect you because you're pious. The real message of the Exodus lays in the two different versions of the fourth command, the command of Shabbat. In both versions, in the Shemot or Exodus version and Devarim or Deuteronomy version, we are commanded to rest and to let our servants rest. But why do we rest according to the first version? Because God rested. By resting, it's an act of B'Tselem Elohim, imitating God, being in the image of God. In the second version, why do we rest? So that your slaves and your servants may rest like you. Why do we get a day off? To ensure that everybody in our house gets a day off. Even the lowly servants get a day off as well. And instead of invoking creation in the second telling of the Ten Commandments in Devarim and Deuteronomy, Moshe invokes Yetziat Mitzrayim. He invokes the Exodus. Our servants get to be free at least one day a week because God freed us from slavery. Now, this is not the first time the Torah speaks about freeing slaves. After the first set of Luchot tablets were given in Parshat Yitro, Parshat Mishpatim, which follows, talks about the Eved Ivri, the Hebrew slave, and we must free him after 6 years of service. In his Shemitah, or 7th year, he is freed too. The Shemitah is the Shabbat of the years. So just as we work 6 days a week and then get a rest, he works 6 years and then he is freed. He gets to rest. The point is, just as God frees us from Mitzrayim, from Egypt, Our job is to make sure that we are freeing others. Now, if we're acting B'Tselem Elohim here, doesn't simply mean resting like God does. It does, but it means more than that. It means freeing others from bondage, just as God freed us from slavery in Egypt. Likewise, the message of the Exodus is God is not going to assure us of victories because we're pious. That was the mistake Yoshiahu made. Moshe, on the other hand, particularly in light of his retelling of the mitzvah to observe Shabbat in Devarim, understood that what are we supposed to do? What is the message of the Exodus, the real message of the Exodus? It's to free others just as God frees us. So how do we do that? Sounds great, but how do we go about and free others? So first of all, part of what we do, and Jews have done a good job of this over the centuries, is to share the message which celebrates human dignity, which the Torah mentions over and over again. But we can do it in a smaller way as well, but a small but powerful way as well too. And that's we can free others from the isolation of loneliness. Pick up the phone and give somebody a call who you haven't spoken to who in a while, who may be alone, who may be suffering because of the quarantine. You can also stop holding a grudge against somebody. Free them from your anger by forgiving them. And you'll find that you're also freeing yourself because holding a grudge against someone really takes a lot out of you as well. And on the same note, free yourself by forgiving yourself. You're walking around angry at yourself, there's nothing good that's going to come of it. And also, promise to make time to do something you've been putting off, but would like to do. Being involved in a hobby and an activity that you really like doing can be very liberating. The point is, the possibilities here are endless. Pesach reminds us that it's our job to take advantage of the freedom that we've been blessed with. Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameach.